Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third session. Multimedia for Posthumans. First presentation is Ioana Maria Stamati and Vaso Capetano, Cinema Different Cyborgs, Accessibility and Convenience. And today here is Ioana.
Hi, a few things about me before I start and for my partner in crime. I just graduated from the undergraduate program of Cultural Technology and Communication at the University of Aegean. Last week I was accepted on a master's program at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, Semiotics, Culture and Communication. My partner in crime, Vaso Capetano, my mom, is a physical therapist, specialized for almost 30 years now in neurological developmental treatments. And basically now she finished up with her master's program on adult education. So, cinema, different cyborgs, accessibility and convenience. If you asked me 4 years ago to make sense of this title, I wouldn't. However, today I'm going to explain each word and connect it to today's reality. Cyborgs of the 21st century keep developing according to their different needs, but seem to be categorized as a mass label in capitalism. What is a cyborg? After a small literature review, I concluded that a cyborg, a cybernetic organism, a governing organism, is someone who consumes or uses technological mediums to survive or keep up with a certain lifestyle. This paper makes an attempt to focus more on the different kinds of cyborgs. These specifically those humankind calls disabled. I really hate this term. But just to get my mind crossed, some categories are well established, such as the mental disabilities, the developmental disabilities, sensory disabilities. But I think the most common to see is the physical disabilities, because aging, for the most part, has the effect of losing the control of the body. What is the methodology here? What I'm going to show you? I'm going to show you scenes from two cinematic examples. The first is a James Marsh's film, The Theory of Everything, and presents the life of the famous Stephen Hawking. And the second one is a David Gordon Green's film. Stronger is based on true events. The story of Jeff Bowman, who lost his lower limbs in the Boston Marathon terrorist attack, and shows his journey to a holistic recovery. These two films were picked methodically to show scene examples on different formations of the cyborg body, of the human, with the use of technology as a vital tool to maintain a certain lifestyle and dignity. So before I go any further, I want to explain what is the formation of the cyborg body. In single words, in words that I explain it to people outside of the academia. Okay, so when one sees the shadow of someone's body, whether this one is wearing a dress, holding an object, a smartphone, in the shadow you can really see where one body ends and another begins. It's a unique mass of human and technology, and this condition, in a word, can also be called the cyborg. In the cinematic world, we have, when we say cyborgs, we think of the Terminator, Iron Man. In everyday life, everyone can be a cyborg. Everyone is a cyborg. But what kind of cyborg is closer looking to a cinematic one? What human has the appearance of a machine? I think the answer to both questions is physical disabled humans. Technologies to help these people are canes, crutches, walkers, wheelchairs, and the list goes on. Furthermore, to enhance of what we kind of call with my co-author the shadow body as an idea, we applied it to key scene examples of these fields. The theory of everything. When Stephen Hawking was a PhD candidate, he used a cane or two to transport himself with more certainty for his body. If we apply the shadow body here, one can see Hawking's figure is a human look-alike figure with 3 or 4 lower limbs. After he successfully defended his thesis, he started using different kinds of wheelchairs, depending on the mobility of his upper limbs. The mobility of his lower body was replaced by 2 and later by 4 wheels. If we apply the shadow body here, Hawking's figure is attached to the wheelchair and doesn't appear clearly as a body and a wheelchair, but as one. So what can we see in this picture? A human, a wheelchair, a human on a wheelchair, or a cyborg with the low strength of a car? The answer may vary depending on the perspective, but one thing I believe is certain and non-negotiable. Hawking had a different way of moving, thinking, getting his mind crossed, and generally living in this world. Okay, so Stronger. As I said, this film is based on true events concerning a victim of a Boston Marathon bombing of 2013. Jeff Bowman was at the finishing line supporting his girlfriend on the race. The bomb exploded near him, and as a result, he lost his lower limbs. The film showcases his journey to a holistic recovery, and in many scenes, the struggle of walking and getting used to prosthetics is present. A closer look at the same method of thought, the scene of what I think is the first time Bowman tried to stand up and walk, I think can speak volumes on how much amputees depend on the technological support to maintain a certain lifestyle and independence. Bowman stood up for the first time wearing 2 prosthetics and supporting his upper body from 2 poles. His physical therapist was in the front if he fell forward, and his wheelchair was in the back if he fell backwards. In this picture above, the description is not clear, I believe, but I think we can see Bowman being one with nature, with the environment around him, and as a result, creating another figure form, another shape of the human. Okay, so now, from now on, I will try my best to represent my partner here. During this study, it became clear that even with the use of technology, patients without rotational movement, torso movement, can experience quite a discomfort with the walking aids of the market. For example, Bowman was struggling to get used to his prosthetics when he decided to find his independence away from his girlfriend, almost at the end of the film. In this short montage, we were very interested in a shot where Bowman was struggling to get up, and he indeed got up from the bench with the help of his 2 prosthetic legs, his 2 crutches, and 2 people. I think this was enough for us to realize the struggle. In other words, there is a lack of walking aids that reflect the real needs of the patient. After this realization, the aim of our paper changed from underlying the different formations of humans as cyborgs to finding a way to comfort and convenience, care for people, so they can have equal accessibility and many more. For us, the model Captain Johnny Walker is our solution. After several studies and several headaches, an important motivation for writing this paper is the personal perception that walking aids should be adapted and configured easily according to the needs of the patient. Capitano's 30-year experience on the field, I think, can attest to that. A second reason is that the reflection of the service that walking aids provide to the patient. In this context, the examination of the problem can lead to the identification of new aids with greater flexibility and adaptability that will directly help patients and the people indirectly involved in more efficient ways of cooperation. Capitano thought of this model with the purpose of contributing to the autonomy and self-care of the patient who shows non-rotational ability and are required to the immediate sitting position due to the inability to support the lower limbs for a long time. So a diagram of Captain Johnny Walker's desired process and outcomes is firstly finding a suitable product of the market, the modification of an existing product on the market, existence of a seat with the user safety, reduce the object volume, easy to use and flexible, simple to use, quick in response, existence of bars to hold the seat, increase and decrease of bars. The study was done on a simple common split walker on which one split metal rod was added that holds a small seat on each side of the walker. Half a seat was placed on one side and half on the other side, so that it could be easy to use with the weight evenly distributed and there was space saving. It's worth noting that in the center of the surface of the seat that makes up the seat, basically, a rod was placed whose head is spheroidal, so the seat would change with gravity and take a supporting position instantly. At the base of the bar, there is coverage at the end of the plastic for better adhesion to the floor. An on-off switch was installed near the handle. When the patient walks and wants to sit down, they press the switch on and the two bars with the seat are lengthened. A turn of the bars follows, turning the seat to the parallel to the floor. So the user can sit and the two metal rods ensure stability during the sitting position. When the patient wants to continue, he stands up, presses the off switch, and the rods are collected back to the original position. So, in summary, conclusions, a human cyborg is using daily its body and its environment to survive. There's also a group with a common factor of physical disabilities, whether these disabilities are momentarily, partially, or permanently impaired, is using differently its body and its environment to get through life. The tools, walking aids, extensions, new bodies, whatever you like to call it, from different shades of the human cyborg according to their own needs. It is not yet known whether this observation of the new state forms reinforces the Da Vinci's work of Vitruvian Man, which is a critical work for posthumanism. There is a divine connection between the human form and the universe, the environment around, or rejects it. However, a connection with the environment due to such use, I think, is certain, and with the proposal of the walker, one can say that the percentage of and capability, independence, is higher for these cyborgs. At the same time, they are more peacefully connected with the environment than other social groups. Like this characterization pushfully is to say that other groups use more, with more toxic way, technology for the environment. To say the negatives of this paper too, we saw these struggles based on two places that don't have exactly a non-rotational torso movement. They had it for some time with other disorders too, other illnesses. Why we chose these two films? Because there is a lack of film productions capable of doing the proper research. So this is why we chose these films. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna, for your wonderful talk. Our next speaker is Dragana Stojanovic, and the title of her paper is Offline Education and its Immersive Potential, Memory, Post-Memory, and History in the Informational Age.
Oh yeah, the microphone, thank you. So for a long time I was a bit reluctant to go into new materialisms, although they attracted me. Actually, I saw it as a big open space. And since I'm dealing mostly with culture studies and media studies and also education studies, actually the education studies were the field where I exploring personally and practically in working with different learners and exploring my own practices of teaching. That was the point of connection that led me somehow into new materialism. So today I will do a different kind of cyborging, I would say. So it wouldn't be the thinking of being with machines per se, but thinking of how to be with and to become with the inanimate things and nature in the process of education. So what I'm doing here is actually exploring offline education and its immersive potential. I was interested in if we could imagine or experience the offline space, so the practical space of materiality, as maybe equally or differently immersive. So that could be similar maybe to something that we experience in the informational age. But let's go from the beginning. So if we think about education and educational techniques, we will see that they have always been very closely related to both information and technology. And we can just imagine an amphitheater that was built to accentuate the sound of the lecture even before the electric power, or we could imagine a book printed and designed to contain technologically as much information as it could hold. And I was following Regis Debray's idea, who put the notion into media spheres, and he said that each and every media sphere, so whenever something new happens in technology, we have a new media sphere, and that doesn't bring us only the new technical tool, it actually brings us the profoundly transformed way of learning, understanding, and acting in the world we perceive. And as for contemporary learning, merging online and offline informational spaces brought the possibilities of extending the education way beyond the classroom, which is fantastic, into a certain hybrid space, or a third space, as Green and Hannon would say. And that itself could be a glimpse into the dissolution of boundaries between space and time, or human and the machine in the process of learning. But I was wondering, is it all, because of that, already a post-human learning? Oftentimes we hear that because we are offline and online and we are using gamifications and we are practically half machines or plugged into machines, that we are post-human just by that. But I would say that it would be maybe too simplistic and much too soon to make a conclusion that a simple usage of online learning tools would automatically bring post-human models of functioning, or that media and digital literacies will immediately lead us to post-humanly oriented learning organisms. In the end, we are still saturated with identities and language power structures and discursive frameworks, and this digital human-centered subject somehow still survives in digital humanistic world. As for the post-human, and we have been talking about it at this conference, it cannot be defined as a state. It is always a process and as becoming. And what is more important, this post-human must be actively done and created rather than defined. Anyhow, we don't necessarily need to reach the point of merging with machines to keep becoming post-human. We can, of course, and we do include infotechnological reality in our processes of education and everyday life, but it is neither a guarantee nor a must in the state of becoming or doing post-human. And let's go a step back. So what already inevitably merges with its surrounding is our human body. It's the human body itself, which is not so much a defined, centered, knowing being with firm skin boundaries, and that would be a very humanistic view of the human subject through his personhood. Our body is more of a sensorium, which would be the extended set of bodily operations tied to its sensorial, perceptual, and performative aspects. And our skin is not firm. Our skin is really permeable, and its agency is related to ontogenetically indeterminate states, allowing, as Barrett would say, for interference effect. And back to education, in that aspect, the post-human learner knows and learns through diffraction and sensorial effects and not reflection. And it responds dynamically, not statically. So to truly touch the post-human aspect in education, both teachers and students should become interactive learners, entangled in their agencies, and they should get involved in thinking with and being with the matter of learning instead of any appropriation of knowledge power boundaries. But let's go to post-humanist methodologies and offline learning. As it was already stressed, all the processes and methodologies of post-human realm can be attained and performed in both online, offline, and mixed environments. Teaching and learning post-humanly and introducing the offline learning as an all new kind of immersion into the field of information can be a very specific and challenging task, even more so with these generations that often seek to strengthen their identities in an online space. Of course, and I want to stress this, there is nothing wrong with the online space or with becoming machines in algorithm systems in the process of contemporary learning. On the contrary, I think it is a very exciting context for working with knowledge and information, but following the possibilities of new materialisms and the sensorial turn in educational practices, here I will be interested in the exploration of, as I said, offline learning spaces as engaging and immersive spaces in the midst of digital reality. This was the question that attracted my attention for a long time, and still it does. Because offline learning spaces might come useful in contemporary pedagogy, still, even in this contemporary infotechnological time. And it can especially be so when online learning is not an available option, which happens a lot, or when it is not an expected or even desirable option. I mean, we can have a certain political stance towards being a part of the web in the process of learning, which again, this is nothing bad, but we can still make our choices. And also turning back to offline learning in a new way might show us that we, as educators and as learners, maybe jumped into the infotechnological realm way too fast. Of course, it was also prompted by COVID-19 context in the recent years. But maybe our educational systems, although renewed by technological possibilities, stayed pretty much the same in their traditional humanist core. And it just might be that the offline context of learning was abandoned much quicker than it should have been and regarded old or not interesting enough or not dynamic enough, especially comparing to VR techniques and web-powered gamifications in education. But looking into the post-human models of education and learning, we could actually discover a handful of practices that don't necessarily involve the web and that are equally, though differently, network-like and immersive. So what would be the post-human education in general? As numerous sources suggest, the prefix post in posthuman is not suggesting a linear succession of the movements in which posthumanism would come logically after humanism. On the contrary, as Braidotti says, any attempt to completely abandon humanism would be both impossible and counterproductive and even dangerous and nihilistic, because as teachers and learners, we work with real people involved with real political power relations in the world, still heavily driven by classes and gender and races and other categories of inclusion and exclusion. According to Arndt and Tesser, and this would be important to me when we think about learning about history in the present times, posthumanism should be about rehumanizing effort of resensitizing ourselves to the deeply ethical relational values, senses, and embodiments of human and more than human subjects and objects. Posthumanism, thus, is not a kind of a scary robotic educational model in which the human is abandoned in favor of the machine, as it can often be heard, but it is a model of active being with machines, but also with things, inanimate objects in nature, and so on, which we could use more in contemporary pedagogies and methodologies of learning. But what is important is when we use, for example, a simple thing like a stone or a book or this microphone, not as a tech stuff, but as an object that we learn from, you see, it is important not to see it as an object. Even my language brought me to this objectifying thing, but we should be with things as equals to us in this kind of an offline reality. So we should learn from the things and with things, but I will go back to it. What could especially prove useful in turning to post-human learning, of course, in the offline environment, are, of course, the legacies of informal and participatory learning, for they also share with posthumanism the hybridity and unbounded character of teaching and learning process, as well as diverse and unpredictable outcomes and immersive techniques. So I will also relay on that. Now, since I'm coming from the field that is related to memory studies and history studies, and in our PhD, I teach the subject memory, history, and media that really deals with how we communicate the history in the present times. I would just briefly stop at this and say that memory studies, and later on in Hirsch's term, post-memory studies, which refers to memory studies in the times after the survivors and the first-hand witnesses. So this is specifically related to the social and discursive phenomena of transposition the remembrance into the diverse cultural texts, such as testimonies, literature, art, monuments, memorials, and so on. So based upon the immaterial network of associations, that's what the memory is, but it's not kept only in our minds, but also in our bodies. These objects that we meet to represent or to communicate what we remember become both personal, but also collective textual and sensorial reminders. Now, also linked to posthumanism. As memory itself presents in the network-like form of a nonlinear causality, and it involves remembering body as a permeable unit in touch with other units, it can certainly be studied via posthuman methodology, and posthuman pedagogies can come useful in learning about historical events, especially those that are not easily comprehended only through cognitive means, be it because they slipped already into the post-memory complex, or because they are too traumatic or cut by voids and silences, so posthuman methods can come very nice here. And for many authors, as for the time is not linear. Of course, this is only a particular discursive concept of time. Time is performative, and it comes into ontologically indeterminate discontinuation through its enactment. That's also about it. And back to the phenomena of memory, that means that memory needs performing or transpositioning into palpable and performative acts of remembrance, and hence the monuments, memorial processions, and so on, everything in order to keep the past in the present somehow. But as Barrett points out, this keeping the past in the present doesn't only mean that the past will be present in the present. This also means that the past becomes present, actively being present, and that it is open to be reconfigured in the present. So when we learn about history and when we teach about history, actually we have the chance to reconfigure the present so it could become future as another present. And that is especially important in the education about memory, history, and past, because it really opens up the possibility of reworking the past by the second, third, and further post-event generations. And this educational maneuver turns learning about history into responsible doing in the present times, or in post-human terms, into thinking in being and becoming in doing. And what is important to me, this open ending of learning keeps history far enough from being understood as one given truth, or as a sacralized remnant of the past, that could turn to being worshipped in a kind of a totalitarian way or any other way at any point. I would personally like to avoid that for sure when teaching about history and memory. But how should we, in a concrete way, achieve this responsibility in learners, especially when they're learning about memory and history? I would use the quote from Henri Bergson, who states that, quote, "The objects which surround my body reflects its possible action upon them." This is the end of quote. Hence, the more objects or elements the learners engage with, the more possibility there is that they would react on them proactively. Following this thought and thinking about learning in post-memory times, there are many offline techniques and methods of post-humanist learning available. Post-humanist learning should imply activated practices in motion from within, including, as it was stressed, immersion in think power, diffractions, agentsmen, sensory inputs, and movements. And Carol Taylor, who we've listened to, calls this approach edu-crafting. And she sees it as an effective material and spatial potential of post-humanist research practices in education, which puts bodies, things, and concepts in motion. And in very practical kind of sense, edu-crafting can be enacted through focusing on non-human matters in space, such as, for example, monuments or found objects, natural environment overgrowing or complementing the memorial area, or if we are inside, that could be a texture in the room or noise, atmosphere, light, and so on. But the specific challenge now, back to the cages of language, is certainly how to collect the sense data and not to turn it into a humanist-centered model of representation. And that can be achieved through communication that will involve more than words and text. So we could make mood boards or photographs or poems, objects, and other spatial material recordings of the immersion into the educational space. So more activities on the right side. What we can also do is taking notes in silence at the learning spot. So completely omitting the language and temporarily putting in on a kind of a pause and just analyzing the meta-reality that is encountered and its effect on the learner's body and previous knowledge. And the learners and the teachers could write down the bodily responses and develop a more complex and decentered understanding of the process of inquiry. What I like the most is that learners can also take the objects, but also teachers, the objects from the place of learning, if it is possible. It might be just a stone or a handful of soil or a leaf or something like that. And they could try to write a diary in which they would describe the process of learning from a teacher that is not a living being. So practically, what could I learn from the stone that was taken from a memorial place? And as Strom and Lupinacci say, this often starts in a very anthropocentric and humanistic way, mimicking anthropomorphic fiction. So I'm imagining how the stone would teach me, but it might soon develop into a completely different language of posthumanism, characterized by, as Strom and Lupinacci say, learning in relation with the more than human world. And besides this technique, learners can also work on noticing affirmative assemblages and on composing cartographic genealogies of the space, which Kay Sidebottom calls intraventional learning. In their book, What is Philosophy?, Deleuze and Guattari stress the importance of people yet to come, or still missing people, and people that do not yet exist. And this is actually the people that we will need in education. This is not the people who would repeat the old representations of history and memory, but people willing to approach the material remnant of history as equals to their learning bodies, but how to come to them. Yeah, maybe that. Yes. So how to come to these people? I am avoiding saying how to make these people. We shouldn't make them. How to open the places at which they would be formed. When we learn about memory and history, memorial places are actually the places where people have a particular affective response. And these places are often seen as uneasy or peculiar, irregular, disturbing, anomalous, and we react bodily with our body to that. And according to Anna Hickey-Moody, monuments themselves create a new sensory landscape for their beholder through their affective potential. So in a way, monuments can be also regarded as percepts, materials crafted into a sensation where the boundaries between material and sensation cannot be clearly defined. And this makes the memorial space an especially effective area for posthumanly oriented learning, which brings the learning agent to the state of affection. And before the conclusion, just one more point that drew my attention. Given in this kind of sense, posthuman-oriented learning brings out the aspect of anti-monumentality, which is, again, useful if we think about deconstructing the huge narratives, the totalitarian or sacralizing way of understanding history. And the posthuman learning does that even in the most monumental work. Since instead of a clear-cut and ready to receive narrative of historical representation, both the teachers and learners open up to the experience of becoming with the place and the objects they meet. And in this posthuman encounter and a complete offline immersion, monumental narratives dissolve into a myriad of singular effects and affects which might eventually materialize into the different and diffractional pieces of present. And in this type of learning, also the teachers should open themselves to this slow professorship, to really stand at the spot of learning in silence, taking notions, learn together with the place. And I think if there would be an absolute truth regarding history, which is itself difficult to imagine or even impossible because of so many different memories about the targeted time of event, it would probably be closest to its posthuman phase, because we have to stay open. We have to always mark new becomings, even about thinking about history and becoming in present for some kind of a future and not putting them in linear space. So for the end, instead of a conclusion, I think that these topics are way too big to make any kind of a conclusion. But I would invite us to think thoroughly about posthuman learning in the informational age. And here I argued for the importance of the offline immersive learning in the field of memory and history, specifically because this method of learning gets highly unexplored and even neglected, as I see, in the era of web-based knowledge and pedagogies. But also in the light of posthumanist learning, the boundary between online and offline learning should not necessarily be clear nor firm, and this is, of course, yet to be explored. And all these topics that we can hear at the conference exceed the size of one paper. But what is important anyway, I would say, is to actively think through the possibilities of creating new affective agencies in learning through posthumanly oriented learning, for there some might bring us into a different kind of responsible presence. And one last thing, posthuman learning might never, and perhaps should never, turn into another big pedagogy, but in its openness to each and every experience, it may be a path to a more diversified learning, more distributed knowledge, and more ethical education, which we need so much at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dragana. This was very inspiring. And our next speaker is Jelena Ostojić, and the title of her presentation is Ethics of Artificial Intelligence in Education.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here. Artificial intelligence is everywhere around us, and we have been using it for years. When we use chatbots, or when we are reading our emails, or asking for directions, or getting recommendations, or using Google Translator, we are using artificial intelligence all the time. And my talk is about ethics of artificial intelligence in education. This is the plan for today. First, we will see, I will mention some applications of artificial intelligence in our life. Then I will talk about that, how artificial intelligence is used or can be used in education. Then about some ethical concerns related to that, and about what has been done to avoid these problems and what else must be done about that. There is no consensus about the definition of artificial intelligence, but I will use one which is most common and probably good enough for us. Artificial intelligence is a technology that can simulate human brain. Machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, and it's about extracting knowledge from data. It can learn from past data and experience without being explicitly programmed. It can correct itself and present it with new data. Machine learning systems are made for some specific task, and they can use only structured data. That means data which are somehow organized. For example, dates, names, credit card numbers, phone numbers, which are organized in some tables or something like that. Deep learning is a subset of machine learning that goes a step further. It can also use unstructured data, like audio files, video files, texts, satellite images, surveillance images, social media posts, and so on. And it's interesting that deep learning models use algorithms that are inspired by the structure and functionings of human brain. Some application of AI that I haven't mentioned, beside those that I mentioned at the beginning, are self-driving vehicles. If you remember Google's Waymo, which was used to make, and still is used for making Google Maps. Then speech and face recognition, remember Google, OK Google. Predicting for different products, fraud preventing in banking, stock price prediction, cancer detection and other diseases, music generation, image coloring, object detection, correcting errors in writing, Grammarly, spam detection, social media sentiment analysis, natural language processing and natural language understanding. And the most advanced language model, is GPT-3, which is developed by OpenAI, and it can produce human-like text. It can write about anything, text, poems, stories. It can answer any question. It can summarize long text. It can simplify text, transform it into code, and so on. AI in education. These are some applications of AI in education. Personalized learning systems can provide materials for students based on their prior knowledge, on their learning preferences, or their abilities, capacities, and they promise to detect gaps in students' knowledge and to help fill it by providing convenient materials. Assessment systems promise to save teachers time. They can assess essays, exams, assignments, and give almost real-time feedback and instructions for improving learning. Facial recognition systems are used to track students' facial expressions. These systems are, you're still here. These systems are monitor students' behavior. One example is Hendrix, who can use analyze images from camera and track students' micro-expressions to find out if the student comprehends material. Predictive analytics are used to detect patterns about students, and they are based on the statistical analysis. For example, they can detect struggling students who are at risk to fail or not to finish a course. Social networking sites can connect students. Chatbots can be used for different administrative jobs. Content-based recommendation algorithms is based on student search history, and it can detect students' interest and recommend some further readings. Availability means that softwares are available at any time for students, and they can use it whenever they want. AI promises inclusive and equitable access to education. It can provide people of the margins, people who live in isolated communities, who are disabled, who are out of school for any reason, refugees, with access to learning opportunities. That's why it's some people state that AI applications in education can contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is about ensuring an inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. So let's see some ethical concerns. Collecting data are on student grades, students' learning habits, preferences, achieved knowledge, capacities, learning styles, abilities, sometimes about their health status, about family situation, character, and so on and so on. And the problem here is that the students are not always in a position to challenge collecting their data. The questions related to ownerships are who owns and who can access the data that are collecting through the interaction with students. How should the data be analyzed, stored, managed, and shared? Another problem is that big data companies entered into the field of education. And the problem is what they will do with this data they collect through the interaction. Surveillance systems collect detailed information about activities and preferences of students. The problem is that this fact can limit their participation. The question is how they will feel if they know that they are monitored all the time. Students and teachers, of course, the same. And teaching can become more stressful job than it is. Autonomy is defined as person's ability to act on their own interests and values. And the problem is that use of algorithms to make predictions and decisions can limit their freedom. Biases and discriminations are critical issues. Machines are trained on data which sometimes can contain unjust biases. And AI tools can keep existing biases, discrimination, injustice, unfairness, inequalities, and can even deepen it. For example, speech recognition tools used to evaluate students' language skills and knowledge are often trained on accentless voice recordings. so they might be negatively biased against migrants with accents or people with speech disabilities. Similarly, facial recognition tools might be trained primarily on white people, images of white people, so they might be less accurate when used on images of people of color. Some other problems: AI is expensive. It can cause unemployment, obviously. It can cause quality compromise, because the question is, what will be the quality of such education, and will students benefit from it or not? Absence of personal engagement and interactions. That means that learning will become less social, and that the question is what will be with soft skills, about what will be about cooperating, helping each other, teamwork, emotional intelligence, and such things. Accountability. No, I skipped something. Broadening the gap. The problem is that AI in education is applied in developed countries and in private schools. It can boost technology addiction of students, that's obvious. Very important problem is the lack of transparency. AI machines are something like black boxes. That means that not even AI engineers completely understand what's going on inside the machines. And the problem is here, how could we trust such decisions, and how can we accept them? And the problem is, will we be able to challenge these decisions? Accountability. The problem is, who will be responsible when something goes wrong? Choice. The problem is that will students can decide if they want to use artificial intelligence in their education. We'll see now what has been done to avoid these risks and prevent harm. There are many soft laws and ethical guidelines. According to a study from 2020, there were 116 soft law documents on ethics of AI at that moment, general, not just about education. The documents were produced by governments, private companies, academics and research institutions, NGOs, including non-profit organizations and charities. The results. The documents identified 11 ethical clusters. You can see them on the screen. And what is interesting, that no single ethical principle appears in all of the documents. There is no consensus about that. Transparency demands that outputs and decisions made by AI are explainable and can be easily understood by humans. Justice, fairness, and equity says that algorithmic biases that can lead to this discrimination must be prevented and eliminated. It's not said how that can be done. Responsibility and accountability says that we must know who is responsible. When something goes wrong, there is no consensus who should be responsible, developers, or engineers, or designers, or the whole industry. Privacy must be protected. Beneficence, there is no consensus about what is human well-being. That's the first problem. Another problem, there is no, what can be well-being? That can be flourishing, peace, happiness, opportunities. And another thing, there is no consensus about who should benefit from AI in education. Customers, private sector would say that, or humanity, everyone. Other principles are freedom and autonomy, trust, sustainability, dignity, solidarity. So I mentioned that these are soft laws and ethical guidelines. That means that they are not legally binding. It does not mean that AI operates in some kind of legal vacuum. These are hard laws which are legally binding, that you can see on the screen, and of course they can apply on AI. But there is no specific hard laws that regulate AI. So, what's the problem with soft laws? As I said, they are not legally binding, and that means that they are practically voluntary. The other problem is that they are usually written in very general language, and the problem with existing hard laws that you see and others, that they are not written with AI in mind, and they do not provide a specific set of rules for AI field. And hard laws fail to directly address some of AI-specific challenges. For example, concerns such as technological unemployment, human-machine relationships, biased algorithms, and existential risks from future superintelligence that some experts think that will exist. So it's clear that artificial intelligence is a powerful tool. It's clear that it will have a great impact on our lives, societies, and probably on education. So it's really important that students and teachers are aware of its risks and ethical issues, limitations related to the AI in education. It's difficult to predict what will be consequences of its use. And I can conclude that it's important that we have the possibility to monitor and evaluate the integrity of AI systems and have tools ensuring compliance with regulations. And it's very important that we have hard law, must have actually, laws that will precisely regulate application of AI in education, because ethical guidelines and soft laws are simply not sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Jelena, for your talk, and especially thank you for raising attention to the ethical concerns in applying AI in the education. And now we have approximately 30 to 40 minutes for discussion. And if you have any questions for our speakers, you can raise your hands and you can approach to the microphones. Thank you.
Hi. Is this okay? Yeah, okay. So I'm curious because all three strands touched on, and I don't know if I have the right language for this, like non-normative experiences, so trauma, disability, and I think in those moments when we're looking at the non-normative, we can produce insight that gets missed when we're looking at the normative so often. Like I think of my own relationship with disability and how that allows me to see things that I wouldn't see if I was operating in sort of a normative able body. And so I'm wondering if in your explorations of sort of the non-normative, thinking specifically about maybe trauma and disability, has that produced insight in a way that you wouldn't be able to notice, or have you noticed things that you wouldn't have been able to notice if we were just focusing on normative experiences or normative ways of being? For me, first of all, thank you for the question. It's not an easy question, since thinking about how we think about non-normative issues puts us into the position to understand ourselves either once again in the fields of normativity, when then non-normativity is something other than normativity, but maybe even that step would be important. So the first thing that I noticed in working with these topics is how we notice ourselves, and not only our thought about normative and non-normative, but also our body. It is literally experiencing our body as not even normative, but as a certain, living in certain form that is not given to everybody else. So we become aware of our bodies, be it qualified as able or disabled, or trauma-struck or not trauma-struck. That is the first thing. And the second thing I noticed, which I think it could be important, is how these bodies and thoughts are cut actually by these voids and silences. Because when you are thinking about the trauma, of course, we always somehow strive to transform that trauma into a kind of an intelligible form, be it a speech about that, or some object of art or something else. But still it can't be translated. And this can't be translated, I catch as kind of open spaces that could connect us to how we could be post-human in that subjective kind of sense, and not making it, normative, non-normative, subject, object, and so on. But still, I think that it is all right if we just catch ourselves within this kind of a net and go from there. So just some thoughts about that.
I grew up differently because indirectly I was educated about disabilities and how to respect these people. That maybe one day yes, okay? So I grew up like that, but I found to adapt to sensory education. I started seeing differently when I was forced to close my eyes with a Band-Aid and climb a stair. It's really scary. It's really, you don't know where you're going. You don't know what you're going to meet at the end of the stairs. You don't know how you will go downstairs again with what stability. And I believe it's a different way of living. We don't really comprehend right now with the sensories we have with seeing, touching, and all of this. So yeah, I believe that only if we censor, we as a normative people, if we censor disabilities, we will know what is going on. Like a simple touch, and an experiment to what you can comprehend. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Okay, so I would have a question actually for both of our colleagues here, different questions. So for Jana, I was interested in this aid that you talked about, so this walker. Oftentimes I think that as, like in the process of becoming post-human by merging with the machines, or in the cyborgization of ourselves, we tend to think about the cyborgization as replacement for the lost parts of body or abilities. But I keep thinking about the possibility to maybe think about inventing or broadening the possibilities of technology to give us maybe something different than our body or more than our body. And when I think about that, I think about the artist Teller, who had his performance exoskeleton, where he stood in the kind of a spider-like body, and he moved it with his own body. So basically, that was a cyborgization that didn't produce the replacement for a lost limb, for example, but something completely else. So first of all, what do you think about that? Would it be interesting, challenging, useful, ethical, etc.? And how your walker is sitting regarding that. So is it a replacement for something, or it is a possibility of a post-human becoming of a different kind?
Okay, so first of all, when I was encountered with Stellar's work, I was talked for a year, I think. I didn't touch any posthuman matters for a year before I continued. But it's something to really think about, like becoming a spider or the hooks. The walking aid. In some ways, I believe it removes a new body that we don't really think about, and this is the help of someone else. Like, these people have to have a person near them and carry a stool, so because they don't have the capacity to actually carry a lot of weight. So if they don't have someone with stool near them right now, they will fall. In the market, the closest thing to a seat with a walker is a very heavy thing, and it's like a cage. So I believe we kind of excluding something and bringing something else, so they can have let's just say convenience.
And another one, if I may, for Jelena. You talked about AI as there was on one slide, as the ability of a machine to imitate intelligent human behavior. And I was wondering, what do we as humans, or what do you consider intelligence? So is it related to efficiency, or the number of information, or the ethics? And where I am heading to is that maybe the whole ethical problem we see with the AI is not about the AI, maybe it's about the humans. I mean, if the AI is designed accordingly to the human intelligence, or what a human perceives as intelligent, then we can imagine AI behaving all the different ways that a human can, and sometimes it's not ethical. So do you see AI as a kind of a mirror of the human intelligence, or another possibility, and how should we approach it?
In a sense, it can be seen as a mirror, but on the other side, it doesn't have emotions, it doesn't have motivations, it doesn't have interests. So that might be a good thing about AI. And about use, the biggest problem, maybe I didn't mention here, but thank you, is how AI will be used. So that it depends on humans, of course. This is new field, many things are unknown. You asked about intelligence. There are many definitions of AI. And what does it mean to imitate intelligence? That means that it's not necessary that engineers give instructions for step by step. That's the core. That's the point of AI. And their machines are fed with a huge amount of data, and they can learn without specific instructions. They have some algorithms, but no one says step by step do this, and that. That's the main difference between AI and ordinary software. So I think that that's the most important feature of intelligence when we are talking about AI machines, and they can make decisions and they can produce original things. For example, you can give, I mentioned that GPT-3, modern language, you can write the title of a song and it will give you a song. You can start a story. For example, once upon a time there was a girl and her dog, and start here, click, and you will get the story. You can ask whatever you want. You can want to read about chemistry and find some article, but you don't understand it. You can copy, paste, and click, and you will get summarized text, which is simplified, so that 2-grade kids can understand it. And OpenAI offers free and open access to that. You can, they call it playground. Anyone can access. That's why they are called open. Their codes are open, anyone can use it, and open in a sense that codes are visible. You can read. I mean, we can't read, but programmers can read and see how each of these application is made.
Thank you. So I guess that as humans, even as simple users, we can even learn from AI in noticing what is valuable to us or what we value the most, and also to assess that. So is it ethical or it is not ethical, for whom and how? So that's very inspirational.
Who will be responsible for example, papers written by AI? That's interesting thing. Should engineer be responsible? The whole industry, the one who asked text, or who will be responsible? That is
or the
problem.
AI itself.
That's one of option. Some experts says that AI can be responsible, not just humans. Some other people think that just human can be responsible.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
To ask a question too, for both of you, one at a time, but would you recommend, because I understand that we three don't have English as a native language, would you recommend Grammarly, for example, to students so they can have better access to proper English as a way to help?
Yes, I use it and I recommend my students to use it. It's very good. Even this free version, I can imagine the premium version might be even better.
Premium can help a lot to academics. I can assure you to that. But I was really interested also with your presentation about one thing you said about history as being one truth. Do you believe it's one truth?
No, of course. But for the okay, super. No, I don't believe that history has one truth. But for the purposes of practical education, unfortunately, in the history books, oftentimes, first of all, you don't get a lot of space. That's why you need a teacher and the learning process. But the books and even the teachers sometimes, and even through our schooling system, be it for practical reasons or for just repeating the old ideas, we were taught to memorize the history according to one simple narrative. And that narrative is, of course, very different in different regions, in different times, and so on. So even looking at this one and only narrative, we can see that there is none. So there is no one of it. But what I was arguing for is that if we come to this post-human model of learning, literally learning with the stone and learning with the teacher and teaching with the learner and so on, that we could have a glimpse of that experience, that history is not one at the spot. So, of course, it would require some time and some experience to really understand all the pieces of this diffractional reality. But still, maybe it could be a kind of a shortcut towards the experience of not one history. Because otherwise, if we start from this is our history, it could take years and sometimes, sadly, never to come to the point that that's not the only history. So that's what I was thinking. But can I also go back to the question that you gave to Jelena? Because I was thinking that it was for the both of us. And first I was surprised, but then I got the idea. Yes, of course, Grammarly is great. But for me, that was a question also about the proper. So again, we are coming to normative, non-normative. And of course, we should learn the normative languages too. I mean, normative ones, currently the normatives. But that is also the question about the proper. So what's wrong with all the other ways of speaking the language and communicating the language? Are we too harsh? And are we, again, going to the one language and one history? And how can we dissolve it? That is also the question. Of course, this is not abandoning the up to now normative languages and narratives, but it is just exploring a little bit further than that.
I totally understand what you mean, because languages can translate as a code, and then the systematic approach we are taking in academia and outside of academia is very stereotypical and can have many problems. I also wanted to ask you about, is this why, back to your question, is this why you were talking about different mediums and actually going to monuments and going on about the century of what went down in this place? Really?
Yeah, I think it all comes down now, both our conversations about the proper language and one history comes down to anti-monumentality, which is a way that we can experience the reality differently than under the huge, big narratives. And this is not a new idea. I mean, even in the post-structuralism and later there were different ideas of how the narrative is not one, and this super narrative or meta-narrative is dead. But still in a practical life, I see it a lot. And thinking about posthumanism and this anti-monumentality maybe can be one fresh way or one different way or maybe a more engaging way, especially for young learners, for example, that I can imagine that would be maybe attracted to a different kind of sensing the world and touching the monument and going so close to the monument that they can't see this super narrative. They can just be with it and think about what they experience. And of course, when we give them more information, but not give them, you know, when we become as teachers and learners with giving the information, maybe we could come to some different reality. I mean, this is all also hypothetical at the point, but I tried some of these techniques with learning from a glass or from a stone or from a piece of soil. It gives interesting results. Oftentimes, as also author said, it could be an anthropomorphic fantasy, but the more they think about it, even the adult learners, the more they understand that they are challenged, and we then come to a point where we have to think differently even about everything we know, and simply from, you know, looking from the glass, at the glass and learning from it in a way. So yeah, I hope I answered.
Okay, now I would like to pose a question for Dragan. If I remember correctly, you defined posthuman as not a state but a process, a becoming. And I'm wondering, Is this applicable for humans, human era also? And the question is, what is the crucial difference, according to you, between a human and post-human? Because philosophically speaking, I think that we could say also that a human is always in the state of a becoming, yeah? And you mentioned Deleuze and Guattari, so, yeah, some.
I often think about the relation of your question or these kind of problems to language. Because I think that what is, now it is both human and post-human, and I think it's not necessarily a thing of a division, to dwell upon the concepts. But also Deleuze and Guattari say that the concepts are not something that is given from heaven, and they have to be made. And if we make them continually, every making would be different. So that would maybe be relatable to becoming. And I'm not sure that we can dissociate ourselves from the language. That is also a very, again, a human thing, an artificial thing, because it could be transferred to AI spaces. And it is a post-human thing if we work with it. But maybe the key for continuous becoming in learning or in everyday practices would be not to dwell too much on concepts, but to retain them in a way enough to keep us making them anew. I was listening to Jelena Stojkovic's presentation, and this it really was giving me a huge number of ideas, and it was impressionable in its way that she was speaking about becoming a child. So looking at things anew, but it's not only looking, it's making the world anew. And of course, it is not divided from the ethics and responsibility, as also she said, but that kind of thing. So active becoming is doing things anew. Something like that.
Thank you very much. Do we have any comments, thoughts? Okay. Please come.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for all of your presentations. It really was very interesting hearing of all those interesting topics I know nothing about, but I'm gladly to, together with you, to come to know. So thanks, Dragana, for referencing on my presentation. I just wanted to comment on that. I relate with your presentation, and I was commenting back there with Nevena, because we are, at this very moment, we are trying to talk about those possibilities which post-human perspective opens for the education, and how we become or are becoming, it's more suitable term, becoming with the world, and how we are sensible for the opportunities, for the encounters. So I think that we can discuss that later, but thank you for referencing, and thank all for a beautiful presentation which opened many questions. And that's all. Thank you once again.
Okay, thank you, Jelena. Okay, if we don't have more questions, I would like also thank you once again all for your presentations and this beautiful discussion. And now we have a lunch break. See you soon.